And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today we are going to do another Dice Throne hero review and analysis where we talk about the ways to play and the ways to beat one of the Dice Throne heroes. And the hero for today is the Samurai. So, to lead this off, I generally like to summarize some things about the hero before we dive into the specific strategies and tactics that you want to employ. And with this hero, it's it's kind of funny how exactly average he is in every possible way. So in the way that Luke Skywalker described Tatooine as the point furthest from the bright center of the universe, if we think of original Thor as Tatooine, Samurai is Coruscant. He is right in the middle, right smack dab, the middliest middle that ever middled. Now, that's not to say that he can't have above average results in events or in particular games, but the kit that you're bringing to the table doesn't excel anywhere. Now, this is offset by the fact that he also has no real glaring weaknesses. So he's just the most consistent consistency machine. And in a lot of ways, that appeals to me. There's a lot of things about the samurai, like the aesthetic, of course. I think he looks cool. But there's a lot of things about the play pattern of Samurai that really appeals to me as a competitive player. I like things to be consistent, but most of the time, when you're in a tournament setting, when you're competing in card games or board games more broadly, being average at everything is not going to be good enough, because the way you beat this guy is you excel at one thing and you beat him there. And then if everything else is even everywhere else in the game, you win on the basis of that one thing. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So let's start by taking a look at the Samurai pamphlet. So there's not a whole lot going on here. We can see that he has the 3-2-1 die face, which are the most forgiving die face arrangement that you can have in Dice Throne. Makes him, he is part of the season 2 pack. So he is, I think, intended to be kind of an introductory character, and he does an excellent job of it. In fact, Samurai versus Gunslinger, I think, does a really good job of showcasing just what Dice Throne is all about and just how diverse of play styles it can appeal to, because Gunslinger is like the most casino-y hero ever in the history of ever, and Samurai is the most consistent. So let's get a little bit closer looking at his pamphlet. We're going to start with Shame. Now, this is a unique status effect to this character. All of his status effects are. Shame. This is, I guess you could call this a defensive or maybe even a control element, but it's kind of a weak one in both of those areas. But this plays into the overall way the samurai wins games, is small amounts of consistent value. That is going to be the theme. That's in all these videos. I feel like there's a few phrases that I end up repeating for each hero, and that's going to be the repetition for samurai, is consistent small value. And that's exactly what Shame does. It reduces an incoming attack by 1. This has a stack limit of 2, so if you have stacked 2 of them up on somebody, you can take their 7 damage average attack down to a 5 and feel sort of good about it. I mean, as an individual status effect, this is pretty low impact. But again, the samurai excels at his whole tapestry of abilities. It's not just one thing that makes him good. So let's move on to Honor. Now, this is what I would call the bread and butter of the samurai. Yes, Shame kind of pulls in the same direction by making your opponent's attacks worse, but this is what makes the samurai's attacks better. And this status effect and the way it interacts with his passive on his board are sort of the key concepts with this character. So, Honor, stack limit 2, you can spend 1 to increase the damage of your attack by 1, or you can spend 2 to increase the damage to 3. Oh, by 3, sorry. That is a meaningful number. 3 is a meaningful amount of damage to increase an attack by in Dice Throne, and the fact that you have to stack 2 of these honors, there is going to be some area for counterplay. But if your opponent is using their status removal to clear honor, that's a bad use of status removal. If you're playing against the samurai, most of the time, honor is not worth it to target. Shame is not really worth it to target. Backstrike as a single token certainly has the ability to produce more damage, or do more impact on the game than both shame and honor, but he gets it less consistently. So generally speaking, against samurai, I don't rate status removal very highly. Okay, so let's take a look at his last status effect. This is Backstrike. You spend this to deal half of whatever your die result is in damage back to somebody after they hit you. So the attack has to produce some kind of damage or else you can't backstrike, and then you can do 1 to 3 damage plus whatever your defense is if it's a defendable attack. This is a meaningful status effect, again, but it's kind of small damage numbers, but you're consistently going to get something out of it. If you have a surplus of status removal while playing against samurai, I guess backstrike is where you're gonna want to use it rather than the other two, but I don't think any of these are exactly high priority for status removal. All right, so we're gonna move on to talking about the samurai's board. So to begin, let's just take a look at the whole board. As you can see, he is one of the heroes that has a passive built in to the lower left-hand corner. The art is, as always, fantastic. I really like the rising sun behind the samurai, the color palette that Manny selected for this. As always, the art's fantastic. I really, really like the art in Dice Throne. But now let's get into taking a look at the specific powers. So we're going to start with the basic attack. Now, most heroes, your basic attack is your fallback. It's a thing you select when you couldn't quite get somewhere better, and that sort of remains true for the samurai as well, but it's important to note that he's going to be doing his basic attack a lot more frequently than other heroes. And in fact, I think we should probably just skip forward to Bushido and talk about this first, because this is going to kind of set the stage for how this character functions. So this is the samurai's passive. If you're the first player to begin the game, gain an honor, and at the conclusion of your turn, if you used less than 3 rolls during your offensive roll phase, gain an honor. So this is your whole engine. You want to get these honors, you want to stack 2 of them, and then you want to burst them for 3 damage every other turn throughout the whole game. More frequently if you can, and there will be abilities on the board that are going to gain some honor as well. But this power is so critically important to the samurai. Going first with this character matters more than any other character in the game because he gets an extra 1 damage, 3 damage, 1.5 damage just for going first. That's great. The rest of this power is going to heavily incentivize you to be not using all 3 of your rolls. Now, I haven't done a video that's a deep dive on competitive strategy, but I would argue if you're in a tournament setting, you're probably not using all 3 of your rolls anyway, so that's not a huge punish. And if you're in a casual setting, maybe thinking about playing in a tournament setting, getting used to playing in such a way that you don't use all your rolls every time. Samurai is a great character for this. This is a great character for new players who want to get sort of a taste of how the competitive scene does it, because using up all 3 of your rolls and then presenting your dice makes you much more vulnerable and makes your opponent's dice fix cards much more useful than if you roll 2 rolls and you present when you have 1 in your pocket. So if they manipulate it, you might still be able to bail yourself out of it. So Samurai plays in kind of a competitive way just to facilitate his honor engine. So let's take ourselves back up here to Katana Slice. This is a 5, 6, 7 by default. Now, that's not my favorite amount of damage. You do have to get all katanas in order to get that 7 damage, but it does peak out at doing what we want, where we want to be, 7. And this is either going to get you 7 plus the 3 from honor to get you up to 10, which is a great basic attack. That's phenomenal basic attack. Or it's the turn where you're trying to build your honor up, so you take maybe the 6 damage katana slice because you're investing in having a future turn that's bigger. Again, it does feel like you should be vulnerable to your opponent's status removal by starting to save honor up on you, but generally speaking, that's just not the case. Most people are not going to use their status removal to get rid of honor, and unless it's like a game defining, oh, that extra damage is going to give them lethal, and if I remove that honor, I'm going to buy an extra turn. In those situations, of course, you go ahead and use it. But generally speaking, I would not advise you to use status removal on honor in the preponderance of cases, and I think your opponent generally is also not going to be using status removal on honor. So I think you can feel safer than usual stacking that status effect up every turn. And popping it every other turn. So let's take a look at the upgrade for this. Katana Slice 2 takes us to 678. It costs 2. I do really like the bump in damage and the ability to inflict shame. Again, shame by itself is not, usually games don't come down to like 1 hit point. So shame by itself is not going to decide games, but it's the stacking of that incremental small amounts of difference that helps the samurai win games. So I don't think we can overlook shame as part of his kit, even though, again, individually it's not great. I do really like the damage on this upgrade, and at a cost of 2, I feel like, especially if you see this early game, I feel like you want to buy this. If you sell it, I don't think that's the end of the world because his base printed attack is pretty decent by itself, and you get to juice it with honor. But early in game, knowing that this is a character you're going to go to the basic attack with more often because probably you're only going to be using 2 rerolls. Let me put it this way. Plan A is you only use 2 rerolls ever on this character. You only go to your third reroll if something has gone wrong, which means you're going to be calling more basic attacks, which means you're going to get more value out of these upgrades than the typical hero would. Looking at the 3 cost Katana Slice 3, it remains a 678, but you're able to inflict shame on 3 of a kind. If I'm gonna get one of these, I feel like, so if there exists a game with Samurai where I have such little else to do with the rest of my hand that I feel like I have extra combat points, maybe I would spring for a Katana Slice 3. Most of the time, if it's after like turn 3, I'm probably going to sell this because I imagine I have more pressing concerns with where to spend my combat points. Things like dice fix cards, the attack modifier cards that he has, I think are worth paying. So I have a hard time seeing myself paying 3 combat, knowing that you want to go first with this guy. You're not going to get that turn 1 combat point. So you're going to have to sell something if you want to play this turn 1. I think Katana Slice 3 is almost always an auto sell. Katana Slice 2, I can see playing if it's early game. But generally speaking, I think the basic attack is probably okay on its own, and there's going to be better places to spend your combat points. I don't think you feel bad by playing these. Well, I might feel bad playing Katana Slice 3. I don't think it's strictly a misplay to play these, but I feel like most of the time there's going to be more efficient, higher impact places for your combat points to go. In a lot of ways, I look at most of the Samurai's upgrades similar to how I look at Barbarians, in that these are things that you sell in order to pay for the cards that make sure you roll the attacks you want to. And again, Samurai only has 2 rolls per turn compared to everybody else's 3. Okay, we already talked about Bushido. Again, it's the Samurai's main gimmick. It's going to come up over and over again. So let's move to Wazakashi. So you need 2 of your most common die face and 2 6s. You gain a backstrike and it's 3 undefendable damage. That damage number seems undefendable, except that you have to factor in it's generating honor. So this could be 6 undefendable damage pretty easily. And the backstrike itself is an investment in future damage. So I actually really like this ability. I think this ability is quite strong. The problem with it is you only have 2 rolls with this character, and you cannot be chasing 6s. More than maybe any other character, you cannot chase 6s with Samurai. You have almost no wiggle room on getting something in those first 2 rolls. If you're using your third roll consistently throughout the game, you're not generating enough honor. Without that honor, you're not doing enough damage, and you're going to fall behind, and then you're going to lose the damage race. So when Wazakashi I'm going to have trouble with some of these pronunciations. I apologize in advance. When Wakazashi comes to you, you feel great about taking it, but you cannot chase it in the way that you could with some other heroes, where you get a couple 6s on the opening roll and you have 2 more rerolls to mess around with it. Taking a look at the upgrade for Wakazashi, it increases the damage to 4. It only costs 1, and you pick up a backstrike. At a cost of 1, I really like this upgrade because you're almost always going to take Wakazashi when it presents itself. It's a strong power. It gets you past defenses that might be problematic for you. if you're in a damage race with Pyro, you really don't want to run into the Pyro defense and take 5 damage back. So undefendable in certain matchups is going to be really important. On the other hand, there's going to be some matchups like say maybe against like Artificer where getting the bigger damage is going to be more important. I don't think the Artificer's defense is that scary, so your mileage may vary a little bit in the Wakizashi, but generally, if I see this in the opening couple of hands, this is an upgrade I like to buy. It is frustrating the frequency with which I pay for it and then never roll a Wakizashi throughout the game because I can't chase the sixes with Samurai the way I would with some other characters. But overall, I like this upgrade. I don't think it's the end of the world if you sell it to pay for, especially if you're selling to pay for something like a Not This Time or Twice as Wild or a really impactful card. That's probably the better play. But as far as upgrades go, this is one that I do like. To then move up to Wakizashi 3, this costs 2. It also inflicts a shame, but the damage remains the same. Now you can kind of think of the shame as buying you time, and maybe against certain heroes when you're in like a full-on damage race, like Pyro is a great example. Having that shame as well as the undefendable damage, that feels pretty strong. At a cost of 2 though, it's hard for me to see the Samurai games where I have extra combat points lying around to pay for an ability that requires double sixes to activate. So as much as I like this upgrade, I'm not sure that playing it is going to be the correct move in a lot of matchups because if you play this and then never throw a 6, you get 0 value out of it. And if that move prevents you from being able to tip it when your opponent's trying to ult, you probably lost the game. As much as I like this power, I don't think you're probably going to hit it as consistently as you might on some other heroes where you'd feel more willing to push for that third reroll. So I'm not a huge fan of especially the 2 cost upgrade, although I could see playing Wakizashi 2 at a cost of 1 and not feeling punished in terms of loss of economy on that play. All right, we're going to move down to Solemnity. So this is the full house style attack ability that a lot of heroes have. You need 2 of the most common and then 3 of the 4/5 die face. This inflicts a shame, does 7 damage. At base damage, that's dead average, like everything else about the Samurai. But once you start to add in that honor, it could turn that into as much as 10 damage, which is really important. Now, one of the things I really like about Solemnity is that if you get something that's kind of gesturing in the direction of Solemnity on your open roll, you can use that second reroll, roll for it, and even if you miss this, you could end up in a Katana Slice basic attack. You get a small straight. There's a lot of other things that you can kind of flop into if you get like a 4/5 and then a handful of ones or something on your opening roll. You can kind of sort of chase after this and have lots of backup rolls. And the reverse is also true. If you're going for a straight, you can sometimes flop into a Solemnity. And that's a really important feature of the Samurai's board. Given the fact that he has 2, not 3 rerolls, important concept, having his abilities sort of flow into each other in this way is a big part of what makes this guy playable. If we take a look at the upgrade, it does a full shame stack, which may or may not be relevant, and increases the damage to 8. It also adds the backup roll of inflicting 2 shame. Now that backup roll is awful. That is a bad backup roll. If you roll that, I feel bad about that backup roll for you. Even if you're playing against me, I feel bad if that's what you're calling as your backup roll. I think Solemn is straight up bad. It's only marginally better than if you whiffed, like barely better than a whiff. The increase in damage on Solemnity itself and the increase in shame is definitely relevant. I think both of those are good things, but at a cost of 2. Again, for a character that generates no combat points except for what you get from game and who always wants to go first if given the choice, he's just going to struggle to pay for things. So if you got that draw where you ended up with a surplus of combat points and nothing to do with them, I think this is a pretty cool place to invest a little bit of that because, again, this is an ability you can kind of chase and feel safe because of the way the dice roll. You might not end up with this specifically, but you could end up with your basic or your small straight or something else. And feel safer. So maybe if it's the second turn of the game, third turn of the game, I throw this down and try to squeeze a little more value out of it. Overall, this is an upgrade that I feel like you can probably, any of these two cost upgrades for Samurai, I feel like you can feel pretty comfortable in selling in most game states. And see, this is again one of those things about Samurai is that you can feel comfortable in selling them, but they're not auto sells necessarily. They're not auto sells, but they're not auto plays. They're kind of like right in the middle, like everything else this guy does. All right, so let's move up to Budo. Now, this is an ability, the small straight, you're going to roll these a lot. And that's true of every character. Small straight is a relatively easy ability to get, and you kind of just luck into it some percentage of the time. This gains you an honor, and then it deals 6 damage. That 6 damage can convert into as much as 9 if you've got a full stack of honor, and you don't even have to have a full stack because this one gives you the honor. So like I was talking about before when we were talking about Bushido, most of the time the samurai is going to pop honor every other turn. But Budo is an ability that lets you go 2 turns in a row, where last turn's honor, the one you just get, okay, now I'm guaranteed to have a 9 attack. So this is a very strong ability. This is an ability you're going to activate a lot of the time. It funds your core economy. It's very easy to roll for, and it has the ability to do legit damage numbers. Like putting 9 on somebody with a small straight, that's for real. Like, that's not average. That's above average damage. Once we upgrade this bad boy, it costs 2, and it gains an honor, and it brings it up to 8 damage. Now, we don't often see damage bumps of that size. Most of the time, damage buffs are by like 1 when you upgrade something, so skipping up by 2 feels very strong. Again, it's going to be hard with the Samurai's economy to find the resources to spend those extra 2 combat points on an upgrade. That is a big investment for him. But if you're going to make it somewhere, this is another place where I feel like would be a really good place to make it. Kind of like Solemnity, this is part of that triad of cross-contaminated roll objectives. You could get something close to a Budo on roll 1, you go to chase it, and oh, I ended up with a basic attack. Oh, I ended up with Solemnity. It's hard to recommend upgrading stuff on him. Well, with one notable exception, but if I'm gonna do board upgrades and I'm assuming I have the combat points available to pay for them and that it's not going to prevent me from playing my Twice as Wild, my So Wilds, then this is one of the handful of upgrades this guy has that I like. I would play this one, especially early game. Small straights are feel like they're easier to roll for than the Wakazashis, and that's what you're going to be doing is kind of bouncing between basic attacks, Budo, and Solemnity most of the time in most games. Jumping up the damage by 2, that is a relevant number. And when you add 3 more to that, well, now we're talking about like ult comparable damage, which is a very, very big deal. I like this upgrade. Again, 2 is a very expensive number for Samurai, but I think this is one we could definitely, in most games, find the ability to play. All right, next we're going to drop down to the large straight. This deals 7 damage, and then you roll 4 rider dice. You can add 1 for each katana, inflict 1 shame for each helmet, and if you hit a 6, you put a backstrike on there. I think it's helpful to think about all of the samurai status effects in terms of damage. So I kind of think of shame as like damage prevention, which I guess it kind of is. Attack reduction, damage prevention, and end up net functionally in the same spot. And I like to think of backstrike in terms of the damage it can deal. So we're looking at a 7 damage base attack. If you've got the honor, it becomes 10. And depending upon how your roll goes, you could add 4 more damage with katanas. You could add a couple of damage with a katana, reduce 1, get that backstrike for 3 more damage potentially. So this could be like a 13, 14 damage output ability once it's all totaled up. That's a big number. Now, large traits are hard to roll for. They're vulnerable to dice fix cards on the other side of the board, and you're not going to have a third reroll. I don't think you want to sacrifice the guaranteed honor, take that third reroll trying to chase a large straight with this character. There are characters where that risk is something you want to run. That is just not the case here. So, as good as this ability is, I don't think you're going to be activating it that often. Looking at the upgrade, you get to roll 5 rider dice. Everything else remains the same. That is pretty good. The backup roll is, I mean, is it worse than the backup roll on Solemnity? Is 1 backstripping worse than 2 shame? Probably. No, I guess it's slightly better, but regardless, it's a very bad backup. It's there if things don't go right for you. It's better than a whiff, but not by a lot. As far as the additional die, potentially adding or subtracting 1 damage, I'm not super impressed. At a cost of 2, I feel like this is maybe one of the easiest sells out of his whole kit. I am not impressed with this upgrade, and I don't think I would buy it in the majority of matchups. Okay, we'll move on to Hagakuri. Hope that's pronounced correctly. You gain an honor, you gain a backstrike, you inflict 2 shame, and you do 5 undefendable damage. Now, there's not a lot of undefendable damage on this guy's board. Might go so far as to say there's an average amount of undefendable damage on this guy's board. Uh, all of his status effects, these are the things that we want to do. Like, if this power comes your way, like most top right mini alts, you're going to take it at any point in the game. If you get it, you go for it because it's good enough. I like the ability to deal undefendable damage into heroes who have problematic defenses for us, which a lot of defenses do. If a character has a strong defense, that's probably going to be problematic for us because whatever a character is strong at, if the character has strong card draw, like a Shadow Thief, card advantage is going to be a problem for us in that matchup. Strong damage, like an Artificer, that is going to be the damage race is going to be the problem in the matchup. Whatever our opponent is good at, that's where our problem lies. So anytime there's a good defense, we of course want to do some undefendable damage into it. Again, I just don't know how often you're going to use this power. Sometimes you're going to throw the dice and you're going to get 4 6s off roll 1 and feel great. Sometimes you're going to be chasing a Wakasashi and you're going to end up with Hagakuri and you're going to feel great. But consistency is a word that comes up on this channel a lot. It is sort of the baseline that I use to analyze not only Dice Throne, but like all card games. I'm a player who really likes consistent, predictable play. Yes, it's fun to have those moments that make players go, oh, I can't believe it around the game table. That is cool. I'm not throwing any shade at the big moment style of gameplay that I'm going to take a huge risk and get a huge reward. I like consistency. And while the samurai is super consistent across a lot of things, he has no ability to be more consistent at rolling 6s. So again, it's a great power. You take it if it comes, but since you only have 2 rerolls, you're going to be seeing this power less often than most other characters. The upgrade costs 2. So I've said a few times in this video that I think 2 cost upgrades on Samurai are tough to invest in because he is very throttled in terms of combat point production in that he has none. Uh, when you get the upgrade, honor, backstrike, 2 shame, 7 undefendable damage. So to compare, that is a bump of 2. That's a meaningful bump. The backup roll, which is probably where you're going to end up if you're chasing 6s on this character, honor, 2 shame, and 2 undefendable damage. So that's not terrible, especially if you're in a matchup where you just have to avoid the defense. Like if attacking in and having Pyro deal 4 damage back to you on the defense is going to kill you, 2 undefendable is way better than a whiff, and depending upon where that Pyro's health is, it might even get you the game. Like if I can attack undefendable and kill you, instead of like I avoided the draw by having a 2 undefendable attack. At 2 cost, I just can't see myself paying for this, playing this ever. This again, if you use shout out to Argonjedit and his strategy series on Board Game Geek, there'll be a link to that in the description below. His analysis of, hey, it's not just the card and the cost, it's the 1 combat point you don't get because you didn't sell this. So when you think about it that way, from the framework of this card costing 3 to get it out on the board, this is, in my opinion, maybe the easiest auto sell out of his entire kit, other than the large straight upgrade. Okay, finally we're going to move down to the Samurai's defense. Stand tall. You only roll 3 dice, which is not great. You deal a damage on a 1 through 3, you prevent a damage on a 4 5, and on a 6 you prevent 2 damage. So you can't fail. There's always going to be something happening with your dice. But if no 4 5 6s are rolled, you shame yourself. Man, do I hate that. maybe it's a flavor win, I guess. Like allowing the full attack value through and not stopping any of it. You've dishonored yourself as a samurai because you're supposed to be better than that. Okay, okay, I will grant that it's a flavor slam dunk, home run, sports ball metaphor galore. Uh, but man, as a card game mechanic, do I absolutely hate that. The idea that my defense roll fails, which feels bad. Well, maybe fails is the wrong word because it means I'm doing a bunch of damage output. But my defense roll slanted towards damage output instead of being defensive, and now I'm double punished for it with the shame. I do not like that power, but it is what it is. It's the way the characters play, and this defense actually is kind of sneaky strong because it consistently puts out 2, 3 damage every other turn, prevents 2, 3, 4 damage sometimes. So it's nerfing your attacks down to below average while making up for the places on his board where it's right at average and pushing his damage values up into above average. And this is one of the ways the samurai wins games. So this is maybe more than, no, that's not fair. Bushido is the defining characteristic of the samurai, but stand tall is one of the most important pieces in the puzzle for how do I win games with this guy. Uh, if I haven't already revealed it, despite its very expensive cost, if you see this upgrade, I think it's an automatic play. The only exception to that may be if you're in a matchup like Ninja, where there's a lot of undefendable damage coming your way and your defense isn't really going to see use. Okay, maybe in those matchups, you sell this. Otherwise, this is an auto play. You get an extra die, that's going to mean extra damage dealt, extra damage prevented, and most importantly, you're paying those 3 combat points to completely eradicate the if no helmets or suns were rolled, gain a shame. Shaming yourself feels terrible. I hate it so much. This makes it go away, and it's a good upgrade. Now, it is expensive. 3 cost in this guy in his economy is no joke. But I think unless, I mean, if it's like the last game, the last turn of the game, and you have no other combat points, and you have Tippet or Samesies or something in your hand that you can't pay for unless you sell this, okay, okay. So there are situations where you're going to sell this upgrade, but in the preponderance of games, I think this is his only upgrade that is a snap purchase. It's probably more important than the upgrade to the small straight or the basic attack or salinity, despite the importance that that trifecta of abilities has for this hero. I think this is probably his most important card in terms of upgrades, and I don't think it's actually that close. All right, finally, we're going to move on to his ultimate, and perhaps if you've been paying attention, you can predict what I'm going to say about this ultimate. It's just so middle of the road. Obviously you have to roll the 6/6s. Shogun allows you to gain an honor, inflict 2 shame, deal 13 damage. Presumably you already have 1 honor on you when you get it, but given how you don't really get to pick and choose your rolls with this guy in the way that you do with some other heroes, there is going to be a circumstance at some point, I bet, where you've already got 2 honor, and this was going to be your pop-off turn anyway, and that's completely wasted. Uh, well, I guess not completely wasted. You can spend the 2, then gain the 1. Backstrike would have been nice on this. 13 damage is respectable. I will say that. The damage, the raw damage number on the Samurai's Ultimate feels strong, and you're going to be adding, almost certainly going to be adding 6 to, or 3 to that to make it a 16. Plus you're taking 2 off your opponent's next attack. So it's decent. But again, with Samurai, you can't chase 6s the way you can with some other characters, so this is probably going to be an ability you're almost never going to use with Samurai without dice fix cards, without saving up for it, having that economic push where you've got the combat points to pay for that twice as wild. All right, last we will move to looking at the rest of the Samurai's kit. So honorable, you pay a combat point, you gain 2 honor. Said you're paying 1 combat point for what essentially translates into 3 damage. If this was just a card that said pay 1, deal 3, I would play that all day long. This is a card you're going to play with the odd quirk in how you make sure you want to time it for optimum efficiency. Pay 1, gain a backstrike, don't back down. I love the art on this. I'm not sure that it totally represents stabbing somebody, like a counter strike against somebody, but it looks super cool, so no complaints from me. Backstrike again is going to translate into 1 to 3 damage. If we just take the middle number and say 2 damage, would you play a card that says pay 1, deal 2? Yes, you would. We all would. This card is completely playable, and at 1 cost, it fits into the Samurai's throttled economy. Next up, we have the 1 cost Shame on You. Inflict 2 shame on a chosen opponent. Um, if it's late game and I'm worried about lethal, sure. If it's early game, I'm absolutely selling this because there's going to be other better places my combat points can go. Shame in and of itself is a pretty low impact ability. Like if this was a offensive role phase card that said pay 1, prevent 2 damage, I'd probably play that because I know I'm going to get it. But if I do this and then my opponent what status affected it away, that's kind of like I threw 2 combat points down the drain, the one I paid for it plus the one I would have got from selling this. Probably I sell this card most of the time in most games. Yishi, pay 1, roll 1, add 2 damage, 2 shame, or a backstrike. I'm not a huge fan of the 4-5 potential result, but the 2 damage on a 1 through 3 and the potential 1 to 3 damage on a 6 all feels great. I think you play this 10 times out of 10. Every game you see it, you're going to play this. Follow through, pay 1, roll 5. Is kind of the same as every other hero has these, except the shame being inflicted is automatic. You don't have to hit a threshold of certain numbers or whatever. That feels pretty good. Now, all of these roll 5 attack modifiers have the potential to do nothing, to not modify the attack at all if the dice decide to be hateful. So that is a thing, but paying 1 and adding 5 damage is a potential payoff that paying 1 and adding 0 damage I think is a risk worth running. Most of the time, it's not going to be one of the extremes. You're just going to add a few more. And if it's pay 1 to deal 2, you play that. So 3, 4, 5 is all gravy. Yeah, this is a card that you're going to play unless there's a very specific thing. Like if I have this and a twice as wild in my hand and I'm going into roll phase and I only have 2 combat points, I'm selling this to make sure I can afford the twice as wild. But that's like really, really specific. Most of the time, especially given the samurai's like whole kit and how dependent he is on like adding little bits of damage here and there, this is a card you want to play. Okay, finally we have the promo card. Kensai? Again, apologies about my pronunciations on some of these words. Kensai is like every other promo card. You roll 1 die. On a 6, you get a bunch of good things. On any other result, you draw a card. The good things for Samurai is Backstrike and 2 Honor. It feels average. This doesn't stand out as like one of the promo cards that's how could they print this, but it doesn't feel like one of the ones that's like super weak. It's just average. So, in conclusion, I think the Samurai is one of those heroes that was probably designed with the intent of it being new player accessible, a portal into the game. And by new player accessible, I want to be clear that I don't mean overly simplified or too basic or like that's not meant to be a pejorative. It's simply you got to learn somewhere. And good games have features within those games to help non-players become players. The Gunslinger Samurai 2-pack is one of those features within Dice Throne. So saying that this guy is designed to help new players or be accessible to new players, I don't think is a criticism. Quite the opposite. But one of the things that can help make a hero accessible to a certain kind of new player is predictability and consistency. And that is what Samurai does better than anybody else. He's more consistently, like his floor is higher than any other hero. Like the worst player making the worst choices on the Samurai is probably not going to have that bad of a time. There's still going to be some relatively close games. It's going to come down to they may end up in a position where they're relying on the luck of the dice rather than their choices more than the other player. But with the samurai, he's kind of not going to let you down in that area. His dice are very consistent. His role objectives are pretty consistent and they branch into each other nicely. Somebody who's just YOLO throwing dice on, say, Shadow Thief is probably going to have very, very poor results. Somebody who's doing the same thing on Samurai is probably going to have, there's that word again, average results. Now, where he does start to falter is in the competitive meta. And the reason for that is we're no longer talking about the kind of preponderance of players. Once you go into a competition space, there's a much greater likelihood of running into a couple of things. One, higher skilled players who are just generally better at the game and understand how to exploit the weakness in your hero. So if you're playing Samurai, there are players who are going to know how to beat him and get around his consistency and where to find the weaknesses in his armor. At a casual game night at the store, you might not run into I mean, you might play 8 games and not play against someone who has ever played Samurai before. Those players are going to be ill-equipped to deal with the consistent damage prevention and damage output that the Samurai generates. The other thing you're going to run into at tournaments is players who maybe they don't have expertise in all the heroes, but they have like super expertise in their hero. So there are players who might be very bad with most of the other heroes that are available, but they know how to play Artificer, Shadow Thief, Cursed Pirate, Pyromancer. They have taken their skill points and invested them into becoming extremely good at the most powerful and explosive heroes in the game. And maybe they might not know the ins and outs of Samurai, but they're so much better at picking the efficient, streamlined damage output options or undefendable options or whatever it is. They know how to play their hero so well that it's going to overwhelm the Samurai because he's kind of like a hero with no expertise. His floor is very high. He won't let you too far down, but you can't carry him that high either. Like at a certain point, you hit his damage output ceiling, and if you're in a full out race with a really experienced pyro player, you're in big trouble. If you're in a full out control matchup with a really experienced Black Widow player, again, you're probably in trouble. So Samurai is going to put out consistent average to above average damage every turn to every other turn, depending upon his honor economy. And it gives the opponent the ability to defeat themselves. Samurai, maybe more than any other hero in the game, punishes missed play, but he punishes opponents' misplay, and he doesn't so much punish yours, which makes him a sort of safe pick, and I think a really good like exploratory pick. This is a guy that you can bring into a competitive environment and not feel like you're getting destroyed because you made mistakes or misplayed. Black Widow is easy to misplay. The more decision points a hero has, the more opportunities you have as a player to make mistakes. Samurai has a very scripted, small number of decision points, and as such, he can be very consistent. Now, that's a positive for you as the pilot in that it reduces your cognitive load in terms of play to play decision making, and you can spend those mental resources somewhere else, like thinking about countering your opponent's strategy or whatever else. But it's a double edged sword, double edged katana, maybe, in that your opponent is also able to very predictably know what you're going to do. So the higher skill and the higher specialization your opponent has in general and in the hero they're playing, the worse the Samurai's results are ultimately going to be. This is a hero that has a very fond place in my heart, and at the casual table, he can look very good. In the competitive table, he can look quite a bit worse, but overall, I think if you sum this guy's results up, he is average. He's right there in the middle, and I think that's what he was designed to be. So again, like I say about basically every hero, because I love this game and I love the design behind it, I think the design team really nailed this guy as a great example, a display for a new, almost like an advertisement to entice a non-Dice Throne player and, hey, come take a look at this game and look at the most consistent thing that has ever existed in games. And for a certain kind of player, that's going to be really, really appealing. And I know I mentioned this earlier, but the fact they put him in the box with a gunslinger, who is maybe the most casino hero that has ever gambled, really shows the range that the game has. And it's just so smart to package those two extremes together in one box, make it accessible to new players, and really show them kind of the whole galaxy of what's available in this game. So in summary, I like the Samurai, and I think he is an average amount of awesome. All right, if you want more information on how to play this hero optimally, I strongly recommend Argonjedit's strategy guide series on Board Game Geek. Again, there'll be a link in the description below to the Samurai article. I've been Mr. Ben, this has been the Build Phase, and you should go win some games.